Imagine walking into, like, a corporate meeting room on a Tuesday morning.
Okay.
Every single agenda item is met. The slide deck is flawless. The timing is immaculate. They wrap up with 5 minutes to spare.
Sounds like a dream.
Right. And the department head lays out this massive new restructuring plan, and when they ask for feedback, no one argues. Not a single hand goes up to challenge the timeline.
Wow.
You look around, you see people nodding, taking neat notes. You might walk out of that room thinking you have just witnessed a highly functioning, peaceful team, operating at peak efficiency.
Sure, I mean, that's what it looks like on paper.
Exactly. But according to the audio artifact we've uncovered today, you aren't looking at peace at all. You are looking at a systemic ticking time bomb.
Yeah. The assumption that a quiet room is a safe room is honestly one of the most pervasive and dangerous myths in organizational psychology.
It really is.
We have been totally conditioned to interpret the absence of visible friction as the presence of functional harmony. But when you strip away the polished exterior of that meeting, what you usually find is a group of people who have basically calculated that the cost of honesty is just too high.
Too high to risk it. Which brings us to the core of today's deep dive. We are examining an incredibly potent piece of source material today.
Oh, it's so good.
We have the verbatim transcript from episode 4 of a show called From Risk to Resilience. It's the Culture Shift podcast.
Right.
The episode is hosted by CEC and Clarence C. White, and it carries the title, The Role of Emotional Safety.
And it is a phenomenal distillation of behavioral science, but applied to everyday environments. I mean, C and Clarence, they focus primarily on educational settings, right?
Yeah, schools, classrooms, district offices.
Exactly. But the psychological frameworks they are unpacking here, they apply universally.
Totally.
The mechanisms of human trust do not change just because you swap a classroom whiteboard for a corporate boardroom.
No, the humans are the same. So our mission today is to dissect this specific conversation and extract its core insights for you. We are going to look at why emotional safety is not some soft, nice-to-have buzzword for human resources to put on a break room poster.
Right, like a cat hanging from a branch.
Exactly. It is the hidden foundational operating system of any successful environment. Okay, let's unpack this.
I think the most effective place to begin is the central dichotomy they establish right at the start of the conversation.
The visible versus the invisible.
Yes. They draw this immediate, sharp distinction between what we can see and what we can't. Clarence points out that when the general public hears a phrase like school safety or workplace security, the human brain instantly defaults to the tangible.
We think of metal detectors.
Right. Heavy fire doors, security cameras in the corners, emergency action plans printed on clipboards.
It's the hardware. I mean, we as human beings find deep comfort in security we can touch. If I can install it with a drill and a budget, I feel like I've solved the problem.
Yeah.
It's binary, The door is locked or the door is unlocked, the camera's recording, or it's not.
And Clarence is very careful not to dismiss the hardware. He explicitly states that physical safety protocols are absolutely necessary to protect bodies from external threats.
Of course.
But he introduces this massive, unseen layer that sits beneath the hardware. You can have the most heavily fortified, physically secure building on the planet, but if the people inside it are terrified of each other...
You do not have a safe environment.
Exactly. Emotional safety is the invisible architecture that protects the mind, the relationships, and the culture from internal collapse.
Which is why this matters to you, listening to this right now.
Yeah.
Because whether you are managing a team of developers trying to hit a brutal Q4 deadline,
Oh, yeah?
or whether you are raising a family and trying to navigate a tense dynamic at the dinner table, or maybe you're a frontline worker navigating a toxic shift rotation.
It applies everywhere.
Understanding the mechanics of emotional safety, as laid out in this transcript, it will completely change how you view human behavior. It is the absolute difference between forcing compliance and cultivating culture.
Well, and we need to define the terms clearly because Clarence doesn't leave emotional safety as some vague, touchy-feely concept.
Right. C prompts him directly to define it.
She does.
Yeah.
And he gives it real teeth. He defines emotional safety as the condition where people feel secure enough to speak honestly, make mistakes, ask for help, and show up fully without fear of humiliation, retaliation, or being shut down.
Those specific words, humiliation and retaliation, they're doing a lot of heavy lifting in that definition.
They really are.
He doesn't just say without fear. He isolates the exact flavors of fear that cause a human being to retreat into their shell.
Yeah, and we have to look at the psychology behind those two specific threats. Humiliation is essentially a social death.
A social death. That's a heavy way to put it, but it's true.
Well, from an evolutionary standpoint, human beings are tribal creatures, right?
Mm.
For our ancestors, being publicly shamed or cast out of the group meant literal death. You couldn't survive the winter alone.
Wow, yeah.
So when a leader or a teacher humiliates someone publicly, the brain processes that social rejection using the exact same neural pathways it uses to process physical pain.
It actually hurts.
It is agonizing. And then retaliation, on the other hand, is a systemic threat.
Hmm.
It's the implicit or explicit promise that if you expose a vulnerability today, the system will weaponize it and use it against you tomorrow.
It makes vulnerability a strategic liability.
Exactly.
If I know that admitting I don't understand the new software is going to result in my boss making, like, a sarcastic joke about my competence in front of the whole team.
Which is the humiliation piece.
Right. Or if I know it's going to result in me getting cast over for the next
The
promotion.
retaliation piece.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I got to keep my mouth shut.
Which creates a massive blind spot for the organization. Clarence provides examples of what emotional safety allows people to do.
Like saying, I'm struggling.
Yes. It allows a student to say, I'm struggling. It allows a teacher to say, I need support. It allows a manager to say, we need to do better. Every single one of those statements is an admission of a gap.
A gap in knowledge, resources, performance.
Right. And if the fear of humiliation is present, no one is going to admit a gap exists.
They'll just pretend everything is fine.
The gaps are actively hidden. And hidden gaps are where systems inevitably fail. The bridge doesn't collapse because of the crack you can see,
Right.
It collapses because of the microfractures everyone painted over because they were too afraid to tell the chief engineer the steel was bad.
Okay, I want to push back on this a little bit, kind of playing devil's advocate, because C actually prompts this exact skepticism in the transcript.
Oh, she totally does.
She asks Clarence, doesn't this just sound like softness or lowering standards? And let's be honest, in high-stakes environments like a hospital or a law firm, a competitive sales floor, people hear emotional safety and their eyes roll.
Oh, massive eye rolls.
They think it's an excuse to wrap everyone in bubble wrap. It sounds like a philosophy where everyone gets a participation trophy, no one is ever allowed to feel uncomfortable, and we spend all our time validating each other's feelings instead of hitting our metrics.
Right, the whole, oh, we're coddling everyone argument.
Exactly.
But Clarence dismantles that misconception entirely. He argues that emotional safety is the furthest thing from lowering standards. It is, in fact, the only mechanism that allows you to actually raise standards.
How so?
The logic is impenetrable. You cannot hold someone accountable if you cannot see what they're doing.
Oh, great.
If an environment is emotionally unsafe, people will expend all their energy hiding their mistakes, performing competence they don't actually have, or just blaming others.
Because the instinct for self-preservation kicks in. I mean, if I make a mistake on a financial report and I know my boss is a volatile screamer,
You're not going to tell them.
my first instinct isn't to walk into their office and say, hey, I messed up. How do we fix this? My instinct is to quietly bury the mistake in a cell on page 40 of the spreadsheet and pray no one notices.
Exactly. And the boss thinks the standard is being met.
But the reality is the foundation is entirely compromised.
Accountability requires visibility, and visibility requires immense trust. Clarence notes that ruling through fear might buy you short-term compliance, but it will never build long-term culture.
Never.
Fear is undeniably a motivator. If you scream at a subordinate or if a teacher threatens a student with detention, that person will likely comply in that immediate moment to neutralize the threat.
But the second the threat leaves the room, the compliance evaporates.
Poof.
Gone.
It's the difference between driving the speed limit because there's a police cruiser sitting in your rearview mirror versus driving the speed limit because you actually believe in keeping the neighborhood safe.
That's a great way to put it.
Fear gets you the brakes. Culture gets you the mindset.
And this brings us to the diagnostic phase of the transcript. If fear only achieves a fragile temporary compliance, we really must examine what the long-term breakdown of that culture actually looks like in the real world.
And Clarence provides a chilling, concrete example of this.
He does.
He talks about visiting these highly structured schools where, on paper, everything looked perfect. The staff meetings had a tight agenda, the timing was rigorously enforced, everyone was sitting up straight.
What?
But during the entire hour-long meeting, nobody spoke. Nobody asked a clarifying question. Nobody challenged a single directive handed down by the administration.
And Clarence summarizes the reality of that room with a really profound observation. He says that school didn't have peace. It had silence.
That school didn't have peace. it had silence.
Yeah.
That is a brutal distinction. It forces you to completely reevaluate every polite, quiet room you've ever been in.
It does. We have to unpack the profound psychological difference between peace and silence in a group dynamic.
Please do.
True peace in a human system is the absence of destructive conflict because there is a deep reservoir of trust. It means issues are surfaced early, they're debated vigorously, and resolved collaboratively.
Oh, people are actually talking.
Right. The quietness of a peaceful room is the quietness of shared alignment. Silence, conversely, is the absence of conflict manufactured by the fear of consequences.
It's forced.
Exactly. It is a pressurized holding pattern. The disagreements, the resentments, the systemic flaws, they are all still there. They've simply been forced underground.
It's treating a symptom by masking it. It's like looking at a volcano that hasn't erupted yet and calling it a peaceful mountain.
I love that. A peaceful mountain.
But the pressure is building beneath the surface precisely because there are no vents.
And Clarence goes on to list the observable symptoms of this underground pressure. He describes environments where students witness bullying but refuse to report it because they have learned that the adults either won't intervene or they'll handle it so poorly that it invites retaliation.
Makes things worse.
Right. He points to teachers or employees who avoid giving each other constructive feedback because the culture is so fragile that any critique is viewed as a personal attack.
He also highlights the leadership side of the equation, which is huge. A key symptom of an unsafe environment is a leader who, when asked a genuine question about a policy, instantly gets defensive instead of getting curious.
Oh, we've all seen that.
They view a question as a threat to their authority rather than just, a desire for clarity. And then he mentions the absolute classic symptom, the one that destroys more companies and communities than anything else.
The meeting after the meeting.
People smiling publicly but complaining privately.
Yes.
The meeting after the meeting.
It's universal.
You sit in the conference room for an hour. The boss lays out the new strategy. Everyone nods, says, "Oh, great idea. Looking forward to it." The meeting adjourns, and the literal second the door closes, 3 people migrate to the break room.
Yeah, lean against the coffee machine.
They lean against the coffee machine and spend 30 minutes tearing the plan to shreds, talking about how impossible the timeline is and how the boss is completely out of touch. That parking lot conversation is the true measure of your culture.
Clarence emphasizes that these emotionally unsafe cultures, they can coast along looking completely fine on a random Tuesday. They survive on momentum.
Until they don't.
Right. But the moment a crisis hits, like a sudden market shift, a global pandemic, a community tragedy, the illusion shatters.
Because a crisis demands rapid adaptation.
And immediate vulnerability. And the frictionless sharing of accurate, often unflattering information.
If the trust was never there to begin with, the crisis doesn't just cause a temporary operational hiccup. It exposes the rot. And the entire system collapses because nobody believes anyone else has their back.
What's fascinating here is how CC synthesizes this entire dynamic. After listening to Clarence outline these symptoms, she notes that emotional safety is tested in a crisis, but it is built in everyday moments.
You can't just suddenly decide to manufacture trust when the fire alarm is ringing.
No, the foundational trust has to be deposited into the cultural bank account through thousands of micro-interactions over months and years, so that when the withdrawal is required during a crisis, the account isn't overdrawn.
I want you to pause and run an audit on your own life right now based on this criteria.
Yes, think about it.
Think about your weekly team syncs. Think about the text threads with your extended family. Are you mistaking silence for peace? Is everyone just playing nice, smiling publicly, and then complaining to their partners at night because the cost of being honest in the group is too high?
It's a tough question to ask yourself, and having diagnosed what a fractured culture looks like from a macro perspective, the conversation in the transcript pivots to examine the micro-level impact.
Down to the individuals.
Right. See and Clarence zoom in on the most vulnerable population within their specific educational context, which is the students.
We have to look at what this invisible operating system does to the human brain on the ground floor. Clarence defines emotional safety for a student in incredibly pragmatic terms.
Very practical.
It means a kid can raise their hand and ask a clarifying question without the rest of the class snickering, or without the teacher rolling their eyes and saying, "Well, we just went over this." It means being corrected without being publicly shamed.
And the concept of correction is vital here. Clarence never suggests abandoning discipline. Students must be corrected.
Right, it's not a free-for-all.
Exactly. But the method of correction determines the safety of the environment. Furthermore, he introduces the concept of predictability as the linchpin of a student's psychological state.
Predictability.
A student desperately needs to know what kind of emotional response they will receive from the adult in the room.
If the adult is volatile, if they are explosive on Monday, deeply sarcastic on Tuesday, completely checked out on Wednesday, and then overly aggressively cheerful on Thursday.
Which is terrifying in its own way.
Right. The environment is fundamentally unpredictable. And when an environment is unpredictable, the human brain cannot focus on higher-order tasks.
Clarence notes that in these unpredictable environments, students undergo a severe cognitive shift. They stop focusing on learning the curriculum and start dedicating all their mental energy to managing adult emotions.
And C has this incredibly visceral reaction in the transcript. She stops him and says, "That's a line right there."
It's a powerful moment.
And it is. Clarence observes that students in these environments are reading the room before they ever read the assignment. I want to put an analogy to this because it perfectly captures the heavy cognitive load of unsafety.
Yeah.
Think about the brain like a computer's central processing unit, the CPU.
Oh, I like this. The allocation of processing power.
Exactly. Imagine a student walking into a classroom where they feel entirely secure. They know the teacher is consistent, fair, and kind. In that environment, the student's brain can dedicate 95% of its CPU power to running the software of learning.
They can actually do the work.
They can read the complex history text, puzzle through the algebra equation, engage in creative debate. But what happens if that same student walks into a classroom where the teacher is a sarcastic wildcard?
The operating system has to boot up a massive, resource-heavy background security program.
The brain is running constant threat assessment algorithms. Where's the teacher standing? What was that sigh? Who is the teacher looking at? Are they going to call on me to humiliate me? Is that a joke or a trap?
It's exhausting.
Those background security programs consume 90% of the student's CPU. They only have 10% of their processing power left for the actual assignment.
What?
And to an outside observer, that student looks like they're lazy or distracted or failing to grasp the material.
Oh.
But in reality, their brain is working in absolute overdrive just to calculate the physical and emotional threat level of the room. They are exhausted before they even pick up a pencil.
That neurological reality connects seamlessly to Clarence's next major assertion, which is that behavior is communication.
Behavior is communication.
When a student's CPU is entirely maxed out by threat assessment, the system starts throwing error codes. The behavioral symptoms we label as acting out are actually distress signals.
They're communicating that they're unsafe.
Right. A student might shut down entirely, refusing to make eye contact or speak, effectively playing dead to avoid drawing the predator's attention.
Or they might deflect. They become a class clown, using humor to constantly break the tension in the room and control the unpredictable energy. Or, they might become outright aggressive, throwing a chair or yelling in a desperate attempt to establish a perimeter and push the threat away.
And Clarence is adamant that understanding this does not excuse the behavior. The throne chair must be addressed. But he is trying to shift the paradigm of how we address it. If a student is acting out because their internal security alarm is blaring due to an unpredictable environment, and the adult responds with a purely punitive measure.
Yelling louder, publicly berating them, issuing an immediate suspension.
The adult entirely misses the message the behavior was trying to communicate.
You are treating a symptom of unsafety by injecting massive amounts of new unsafety into the system. It's like trying to put out a grease fire with a bucket of water.
Oh, terrible idea.
You just cause the explosive energy to spread everywhere.
A relational response, however, requires the adult to look past the error code and examine the structural integrity of the environment that caused the system to crash in the first place.
But a student doesn't just spontaneously decide to run a threat assessment protocol. They are responding to a stimulus. And that stimulus is usually the adult standing at the front of the room. We cannot look at a student's behavior in a vacuum and simply blame the kid, nor can we point fingers at the teacher as if they are an isolated villain.
No, it's bigger than that.
We have to look up the chain of command. We have to examine the systemic environment the adults are forced to operate in.
This transition leads directly to what is arguably the central thesis statement of the entire source text. Clarence shifts the analytical lens from the students to the staff, and he delivers a definitive truth. He says, you can't create emotionally safe classrooms with emotionally unsafe adults.
Boom. The adult epidemic. You cannot give what you do not have.
The transcript outlines what the parameters of emotional safety look like for the adult staff. It means a teacher can walk into a principal's office and say, I am completely overwhelmed by this new curriculum.
And not be punished for it.
Right, without the leadership silently labeling them as weak, incompetent, or a candidate for a performance improvement plan. It means receiving constructive, difficult feedback in a private, supportive setting, rather than being subtly called out in front of 50 peers during a staff meeting.
It means an administration that can hear hard, uncomfortable truths from the frontline workers without punishing the person who brought the honesty. It requires a culture where working yourself to the bone isn't celebrated as a badge of honor, but recognized as a systemic failure that leads to burnout.
Because if the adults are deprived of that safety, if the teachers are walking on eggshells around an erratic principal, or terrified of arbitrary mandates from district supervisors, or if they are pitted against each other in cutthroat competition for limited resources,
They will revert to survival mode.
they absolutely will.
And human beings in survival mode do not collaborate. They defend.
And here's where it gets really interesting. When you start looking at this as a sprawling, interconnected ecosystem, you realize the boundaries of the workplace are entirely porous.
The tension doesn't stay at work.
No, the concept of the spillover effect is critical to Clarence's argument. He states explicitly that the culture among the staff always, inevitably, spills over to the students.
It trickles down.
And C expands on this, clarifying that if adults are tense, guarded, cynical, and distrustful of leadership, that toxic energy cannot be neatly contained within the walls of the staff break room.
Humans are incredibly sensitive emotional barometers. We pick up on micro-expressions, changes in vocal pitch, body language. Let's look at how the spillover effect practically ruins a day. Imagine a district superintendent sends a blistering, hypercritical email to a school principal at 7 a.m. over standardized test scores.
The principal's cortisol spikes.
Exactly, they go into fight-or-flight mode.
The principal then walks out of their office and immediately encounters a third-grade teacher who just needs a signature for a field trip form. The principal, flooded with adrenaline and stress from the superintendent, snacks at the teacher, criticizing them for interrupting.
The teacher, who was perfectly happy 5 minutes ago, now has their own cortisol spike. They feel humiliated and unsupported. They walk into their classroom to teach math. A kid in the second row drops their pencil box. It shatters. Pencils go everywhere.
Normally, not a big deal.
Normally, the teacher would help pick them up. But today, operating in survival mode, the teacher screams at the kid for being clumsy and disruptive.
The student CPU maxes out, they shut down, they go home that afternoon, still carrying the residual anxiety of being publicly shamed, and they pick a massive fight with their younger sibling at the dinner table.
The parents get stressed. The entire community ecosystem is disrupted. The unsafety flows downhill following gravity from the highest levels of leadership all the way to the most vulnerable participants in the system. The culture breaks down at a cellular level. And, mid-episode, they actually do a sponsor break. And they mention all these local partners, Chicon Consulting, His and Her Hauling, Norris White Nursing Consulting. It just shows how interconnected the whole ecosystem is. Health, transport, schools, it all relies on the same foundational trust.
It really does. Clarence hits this point hard. Human systems do not run on policy manuals. They don't run on mission statements or bell schedules. They run entirely on the quality of relationships.
Relationships are everything.
When the adults are forced to shift their cognitive focus from collaborating on creative solutions to simply surviving the political environment of the administration, the relational network shatters. Everyone feels the spillover.
Which brings us to the inevitable conclusion regarding responsibility. If the culture is broken from the top down, and if unsafety flows downhill, then the solution must also be initiated from the top down.
Right. You cannot demand that the frontline workers or the students fix the emotional climate of the institution.
The burden lies with leadership.
Knowing that, we have to look at the playbook. Theory is fascinating, but what can a leader actually do on a Tuesday afternoon to fix a toxic environment?
Clarence doesn't leave us hanging. He provides a highly tactical 5-step playbook for leaders. And by leaders, he means anyone with influence. A CEO, a principal, a middle manager, or a parent.
The 5 steps are sequential and deeply rooted in behavioral psychology. Step 1, model calm. Step 2, respond with curiosity before judgment. Step 3, separate correction from humiliation. Step 4, create consistent spaces for feedback. And step 5, follow through.
Let's really dig into these because they sound incredibly simple on a podcast, but they are agonizingly difficult to execute when you are under actual pressure. Step 1, model calm. Clarence observes that people borrow emotional cues from leaders.
This phenomenon is known as emotional contagion, and it is governed by the mirror neurons in the brain.
Mirror neurons.
Yes. In any social hierarchy, the pack constantly scans the alpha for threat assessments. If the leader of a pack appears panicked, erratic, or highly reactive, the nervous systems of everyone in the pack automatically assume there is a predator nearby.
And they also begin to panic.
Exactly.
If a manager walks into an open-plan office and slams their laptop down, sighing heavily, the entire floor instantly tenses up.
You can feel the air leave the room.
A leader's primary job, before they utter a single word of direction, before they issue a policy change or assign a task, is to regulate the emotional temperature of the space by actively managing their own physiological reactivity.
And step 2 provides the specific cognitive tool required to maintain that calm. Respond with curiosity before judgment. Clarence suggests asking a simple question, what happened, before assuming the motive behind an action.
This directly combats one of the most stubborn biases in the human brain. We naturally assume the worst intentions in others while excusing our own behavior.
The fundamental attribution error.
Right. If an employee is late to a meeting, the manager's brain instantly assumes the employee is lazy, disrespectful, or disorganized. But if the manager is late to a meeting, they know it's because traffic was a nightmare or a previous call ran long.
By forcing yourself to ask, what happened? Before issuing a reprimand, the leader actively pauses their own internal narrative and invites the other person's reality into the room.
It's a huge shift.
It is a profound mechanism for building instant safety because it signals to the subordinate, I am willing to hear your context before I act as judge and jury.
Let's look at steps 4 and 5 together. Step 4 is create consistent spaces for feedback, like listening sessions or team check-ins. I have to be honest, I read that and immediately cringed.
Why is that?
In the corporate world, creating a space for feedback usually just means setting up an anonymous HR suggestion box or sending out an annual survey. Employees pour their hearts out into these little text boxes, management reads them, sends out a generic email saying, we hear you and we value your input, and absolutely nothing changes. It feels like a trap.
You have identified the exact pitfall that C and Clarence warn against with utmost urgency. Step 4 is not only useless without step 5, which is follow-through, it is actively destructive.
C highlights this in the transcript. She says, that follow-through piece is major.
It is the absolute hinge upon which all systemic trust swings. Clarence is incredibly blunt about this dynamic. He states, nothing damages emotional safety faster than asking people to be honest and then doing nothing with what they shared.
So true.
We have to think deeply about the psychology of a feedback request. When a leader asks for honest feedback in an environment that has previously been unsafe, they are not just asking for data. They are asking an employee to take a massive personal risk.
You are asking them to drop their shield. You are asking them to step out of the trenches, expose a vulnerability, and trust that you won't shoot them.
Exactly. And if an employee takes that brave step, hands you their honest, vulnerable truth about what is broken in the company, and you do absolutely nothing with it.
Or worse, if you get defensive and try to argue with their experience.
You have not simply failed to improve the system. You have actively betrayed them. You have provided empirical proof that their voice is meaningless.
It turns a genuine plea for collaboration into a deeply cynical act of performative leadership theater. The leader gets to feel good about listening, while the employee learns a bitter lesson. The next time that leader asks for feedback, the room will be dead silent.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, leadership is fundamentally an active daily practice of closing the loop. It is the architectural work of ensuring that when people risk vulnerability, they see a tangible structural result from that risk.
So we have the playbook. But theory mapped out on a whiteboard is very different from reality in a pressure cooker moment.
Oh, absolutely.
What happens when the crisis is literally unfolding in front of you? The transcript offers a fascinating granular look at the exact script Clarence provides for real-time de-escalation.
C sets up a highly relatable crucible moment in the text. She says, suppose a student is upset in class, a teacher is frustrated, and the room is tense. What does an emotionally safe response look like?
And this translates perfectly to an employee having a meltdown in a meeting, or a teenager losing their temper in the kitchen.
Clarence rattles off 4 specific, carefully constructed phrases. Number 1, I can see you're frustrated. Let's pause. Number 2, take a breath. We're going to work through this. Number 3, We're going to address the behavior, but I'm not going to embarrass you. And number 4, tell me what happened from your side.
Those 4 sentences represent an absolute masterclass in neurological de-escalation.
They really do.
I cannot get over the third phrase.
I can't.
I'm not going to embarrass you. Imagine being a defensive, angry kid backed into a corner, completely terrified, ready to fight the adult in the room. And the adult looks at you, lowers their voice, and explicitly promises, I am not going to embarrass you.
It changes everything.
That is so unbelievably disarming. It explicitly identifies the hidden threat, public humiliation, and takes the weapon entirely off the table.
It speaks directly to the terrified amygdala. The aggressive behavior is almost always driven by a CPU that is screaming that a social death is imminent. By naming the fear and legally binding yourself not to exploit it, the leader immediately lowers the cognitive threat level in the room. The student's brain can stand down from red alert.
But again, the skeptic in me hears this and wonders about the softness myth we talked about earlier. Does looking at an aggressive kid or a toxic employee and saying, I won't embarrass you, mean they just get away with the behavior?
Absolutely not. And Clarence is rigorous about maintaining this distinction. He says, that doesn't mean there are no consequences. It means the person still has dignity while the issue gets addressed.
That's the key.
Accountability is still mandatory. You can still assign a detention. You can still require a formal apology. You can still fail the project or put the employee on a performance plan.
But you do it privately. You do it respectfully. You separate the terrible behavior from the inherent, unchangeable worth of the human being sitting across from you.
So what does this all mean? When we boil this entire expansive transcript down to its absolute essence, what is the ultimate thesis that C and Clarence are presenting to us?
C sets it up perfectly near the end of the episode. She listens to the script and says, and that dignity matters. And Clarence replies, every time. Dignity is not a reward for good behavior. It's the baseline for healthy culture.
That is the ultimate paradigm shift. So many of our human systems operate on the toxic assumption that respect and dignity are currency that must be earned through compliance.
Like it's a prize.
The implicit message is, if you follow the rules, we will treat you like a human being. If you break the rules, we will strip you of your dignity as the primary feature of your punishment.
Which practically guarantees a fractured culture because human beings are inherently messy, flawed, and will inevitably break rules. If dignity is conditional upon perfect behavior, then true safety is mathematically impossible. Dignity must be the solid floor you stand on, not a prize you pull down from the shelf when you are good.
And this leads to Clarence's final urgent call to action. He states unequivocally, emotional safety is not a luxury. It is a leadership responsibility.
We've taken an extensive journey today through this remarkable piece of audio history. We began by redefining the very nature of safety, moving past the comforting illusions of physical hardware to confront the invisible, load-bearing architecture of trust.
We stared into the terrifying illusion of the perfectly silent meeting, recognizing that the complete absence of conflict is usually just the overwhelming presence of fear.
We analyzed the crushing cognitive load placed on students or employees who are forced to dedicate all their mental processing power to predicting the volatile emotional explosions of the adults in charge.
We tracked the unavoidable physics of the spillover effect, proving that stressed, burned-out, curded leaders cannot magically manufacture safe, thriving environments for the people under their care. The cortisol always flows downhill.
And we broke down a tactical, dignity-first playbook for leaders, modeling calm, leading with curiosity, and making that radical, disarming promise, I'm going to hold you fully accountable, but I'm never going to humiliate you.
Which brings us to a final, slightly uncomfortable thought. Something to build directly on Clarence's assertion that this is a leadership responsibility. We agreed earlier that you cannot create an emotionally safe classroom with an emotionally unsafe teacher.
Right.
We agreed the unsafety flows downhill. But if that is an absolute law of human physics, we have to look up one level further.
Okay, where does it end?
If you are listening to this right now and you hold a position of leadership, if you are the principal, the district superintendent, the corporate director, or the parent tasked with maintaining this emotional climate for everyone beneath you, who is providing emotional safety for you?
Wow. It is a massive systemic flaw to demand that middle management or frontline leaders act as gigantic emotional shock absorbers for the entire organization without giving them a suspension system of their own.
Exactly. If the overarching system demands that leaders be the ultimate emotional anchor, absorbing panic without reacting, we must ruthlessly examine whether our corporate boards, our district structures, and our societal expectations are giving those very leaders the grace to make mistakes, to ask for help, and to be profoundly human without fear of retaliation from the top.
You can't just squeeze them dry.
You cannot mandate that a manager dispense grace if they are existing in a system that only dispenses judgment. For the architecture to hold, the emotional safety has to extend all the way up to the very top of the hierarchy.
Who is holding the structural integrity for the people holding the structural integrity? That is the question to sit with this week. Thank you so much for joining us for this extensive deep dive into the source material.
It's been a great conversation.
We hope this exploration of From Risk to Resilience gives you a completely new set of blueprints for viewing the human systems in your own life. Think about how you can begin to transform your own spaces, whether that is a boardroom, a classroom, or your own living room, as seeing Clarence suggests, one conversation at a time. When you walk into your environment tomorrow, don't just look for the heavy fire doors and the cameras. Pay close attention to the invisible architecture. Pay attention to what happens when the rules fail. We'll catch you next time.